Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. A human man, Ethan Blake, sat in a quiet corner of a high-end galactic market. As a seasoned translator and negotiator for intergalactic trade, he had seen his fair share of strange occurrences, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen. He sipped his drink, glancing over the bustling crowd of alien species from countless systems. Humanoids of all sizes, colors, and shapes, their strange languages and customs a blend of cosmic diversity. Ethan had recently been hired for a translation job by a wealthy merchant, a job that barely paid enough to cover his rent on a barely furnished flat. But then again, work had been scarce in this trade district for a while, and beggars couldn't be choosers. As he leaned back in his chair, idly watching the local holographic advertisement play, his attention was suddenly caught by the appearance of an alien woman. She was unlike any being he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered with iridescent hues, shifting in the light like the surface of an opal, and her long, silver hair cascaded in gentle waves around her shoulders. The shape of her face was angular, with sharp cheekbones, and her large, luminescent eyes radiated intelligence. She wore an elegant yet minimalistic attire that suggested nobility, and despite her foreign appearance, there was something about her that screamed authority. The woman walked towards Ethan with a confident stride, her presence commanding attention in the crowded space. As she reached him, she stopped and tilted her head slightly, her gaze scanning him with an air of curiosity. "You are Ethan Blake, yes?" Her voice was melodic yet firm, her tone carrying a trace of something ancient and unfamiliar. Her language was a precise translation of his native tongue, but there was an almost unnatural perfection to it. Ethan, caught off guard by her sudden approach, stood up in response. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" he asked, a mixture of surprise and wariness crossing his features. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a step closer, her gaze piercing as if she were trying to peer into his very soul. Ethan's heart rate quickened. He had encountered powerful beings before, but there was something different about her. "I need a human," she said, the words strange and foreign yet undeniably serious. "I require one to fulfill a very specific role, one that only a human can complete. You are the one I have chosen." Ethan raised an eyebrow, skepticism creeping into his voice. "And what role would that be? You look like you've got everything figured out. What would you need with a human?" Her expression remained unreadable, her luminescent eyes narrowing slightly. "I require a husband, a human husband. You, Ethan Blake, are the one I've selected." The words hit him like a freight train. He blinked, certain he had misheard her. "Wait, you want me to marry you?" he asked incredulously, the disbelief evident in his voice. "You're not serious, right?" Her response came swiftly, and to his shock, she reached into a pouch on her belt and withdrew a small, gleaming device. She pressed it against the table between them, and a holographic display flickered to life. On it were several detailed contracts, each one outlining an agreement for an extraordinary sum of credits. More than Ethan could ever dream of earning in a lifetime. "I am serious. You will be compensated generously. In exchange for your cooperation, I will ensure you receive a lifetime of wealth, resources, and a standing within my dominion. Your cooperation is a small price to pay for the benefits you will gain." Ethan stared at the glowing contracts. His mind raced, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. A marriage proposal from an alien noblewoman, with riches beyond comprehension attached to it? But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't afford to dismiss it. His life had been a constant struggle to make ends meet, to survive in a world that seemed indifferent to his existence. This was a golden opportunity, a one-in-a-lifetime chance to secure everything he had ever wanted. But at what cost? Before he could fully process the implications, the woman spoke again, her tone growing more intense. "I do not ask lightly. Your species holds unique value. You humans are known for your resilience, creativity, and, most of all, your ability to withstand adversity. This makes you the ideal partner for what I require. You will be treated with the utmost respect, but understand that this arrangement is not negotiable. Will you accept?" Ethan's gaze shifted back to the holographic contracts, the swirling texts promising unimaginable wealth. His heart beat faster, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. He could refuse. He could walk away and continue scraping by in this hostile universe. But would he ever get another chance like this? "Tell me, what exactly am I agreeing to here?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside. He was a negotiator by trade, and if there was one thing he knew, it was that every contract had its hidden clauses. He needed to understand what he was getting into before signing his life away. The woman's eyes glowed brighter, and for the first time, her lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile. "You will marry me. You will join me in my world, where your life will be forever altered. But be warned, human. This marriage is not a simple union of hearts. It is an alliance forged in necessity. There will be challenges, sacrifices, and obstacles. And yet, together we will thrive." As she finished speaking, Ethan felt a strange pull inside of him, a mix of excitement and fear. He had always dreamed of something greater, something beyond the mundane. But could he truly trust her? Could he trust an alien woman with his future? He glanced at the contract once more. "I'll need time to think about it," he said, his voice calm but his mind racing. Her smile widened, her eyes gleaming. "Of course. But understand this, Ethan Blake. The offer stands, and it will not wait forever." Ethan sat alone in his cramped apartment later that evening, the flickering light from his holographic desk lamp casting shadows across the room. His mind was consumed by the encounter. The alien woman's words echoed in his thoughts, her proposal lingering like a heavy weight on his chest. He'd had a few hours to think it over, but the idea of marrying an alien, a being so far beyond his understanding, felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Was it a dream come true, or was it a trap? He stared at the contract she had shown him, now displayed on his desk in digital form. The terms were absurdly generous. Financial compensation that could set him up for life, access to exclusive resources and technology, and a place among the elite of her domain. But there was something unsettling about the offer. Ethan knew too well that nothing came without strings attached, especially in the world of galactic politics and interspecies power plays. What if she wasn't simply asking for a husband, but for something more? And if she were truly as powerful as she seemed, what could she want with a human like him? His thoughts were interrupted by the soft buzz of his communicator. It was a message from one of his few remaining friends in the galaxy, a fellow translator named Tessa. Ethan had been avoiding her lately. He had always been a loner, and now he was unsure whether he could share his strange predicament with her. He hesitated for a moment before opening the message. "Ethan," it began, "I heard about your job offer. Are you seriously considering it? I've been doing some digging, and there's a lot about this alien woman that's unusual. If you need someone to talk it through with, I'm here. You're not alone in this." A knot formed in Ethan's stomach as he read the message. Tessa had always been the cautious one, the voice of reason. She had warned him about taking jobs that seemed too good to be true. But this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Ethan could feel her concern even through the sterile words of the message. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about his options. He could take the safe route, turn her down, walk away from the wealth, the power, the chance at a life he had only ever dreamed of. But that would mean staying stuck in the same cycle, barely getting by, never taking a risk. Wasn't that what had gotten him here in the first place? Never taking the leap? His fingers hovered over the communicator screen, weighing the decision. Finally, he typed a quick response to Tessa. "I don't know what to make of it yet, but I'm considering it. It feels like a one-time opportunity. Thanks for looking out for me, though. I'll keep you posted." He turned off the communicator and stared at the glowing contract once again. There was no turning back now. He had to make a choice. The next morning, Ethan made his way to the market where he had first met the alien woman. The crowd was even denser today, with merchants shouting their wares in a dozen different languages, their stalls overflowing with exotic goods. But Ethan's eyes were focused on a solitary figure standing near the center of the plaza. There she was, her shimmering skin glowed in the morning light, the soft hum of energy radiating from her as she stood, waiting. She looked almost out of place among the chaos of the market, an ethereal figure in a world of noise and clamor. As he approached, she turned to meet his gaze, her large eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Without a word, she motioned for him to follow her. Ethan complied, his steps slow and deliberate as they made their way toward a quiet alcove at the edge of the marketplace. When they were out of earshot of the bustling crowd, she turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I have been waiting for your decision," she said, her voice calm but carrying an underlying force. "Have you made up your mind?" Ethan took a deep breath. He had spent hours, maybe longer, agonizing over this moment. And now, standing before her, he realized that the choice was simpler than he had imagined. The question wasn't whether he could trust her. It was whether he was willing to trust himself. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. "I'll marry you, but I need to know exactly what I'm signing up for. What does this marriage entail? What's the real reason you need a human?" The woman's eyes flickered for a moment, a brief flash of something unreadable crossing her features. Then she nodded, her face softening. "As I said before," she began, "this union is not merely one of affection. It is a strategic alliance. There are forces in my world that seek to undermine my authority. To secure my position, I need a partner. Someone with qualities that no other being in my domain possesses." She paused, as if carefully choosing her words. "Your species, humans, have a rare and valuable trait: resilience. You have fought countless wars, survived impossible odds, and yet you continue to thrive. That is what I need. I need someone who can stand beside me, unyielding in the face of adversity, to help me navigate the challenges that lie ahead." Ethan furrowed his brow. "So, you're using me as a pawn in your political game?" Her eyes darkened slightly, but her tone remained calm. "Not a pawn, Ethan. Partner. You will have a voice in the decisions that are made. I will not force you into anything you do not wish to do, but I ask for your loyalty, for your strength. And, in return, I will offer you everything you could possibly desire. Power, wealth, knowledge, influence. A place at my side. No human has ever been offered such an opportunity." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. There were so many unknowns, so many risks. Yet, beneath it all, there was a stirring in him, a desire for something more than the small, insignificant life he had led up until now. "I'll do it," he repeated, more firmly this time. "I'll marry you." She smiled, her lips curving into a smile that was both satisfied and knowing. "Then it is settled." As they shook hands, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what he was getting himself into. Was this the start of something grand, or had he just made a deal with the devil? The days following Ethan's agreement were a whirlwind of preparation. He barely had time to process the magnitude of his decision before he was swept into a flurry of meetings, briefings, and exchanges with the alien woman's representatives. Her name was Lyra, and she was far more than just an alien noblewoman. She was the ruler of a powerful interstellar faction, a member of an ancient race whose political influence spanned entire star systems. Despite the luxury and extravagance surrounding the preparations, Ethan couldn't shake the sense of unease. He had agreed to marry Lyra, but he didn't truly understand the full scope of what this would mean for his life. The idea of being married to someone so powerful, someone who had an entire galaxy at her disposal, was both exhilarating and terrifying. And the deeper he delved into her world, the more he realized just how far removed he was from it. Ethan spent his days being briefed on the customs and rituals of her species. He was introduced to a team of alien stylists who worked tirelessly to prepare him for the wedding, transforming him into something far beyond his usual scruffy, unkempt self. They tailored a suit to fit his form, a sleek black ensemble that shimmered with an otherworldly sheen. His hair was styled and his face scrubbed clean, a far cry from the disheveled look he was used to. Everything about him had to reflect the importance of the occasion. He had learned quickly that this wasn't just a wedding. It was a formal union that would solidify Lyra's position in her empire. It wasn't about love, it was about power, influence, and survival. And yet, despite the lack of romantic affection, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. He was about to marry a woman whose status was incomprehensible to him. A woman who held the fate of entire civilizations in her hands. The night before the wedding, he sat alone in his quarters, staring at his reflection in a polished mirror. The man who stared back at him barely resembled the one he had been only days before. He had gone from a struggling translator to the soon-to-be husband of a galactic queen. He ran a hand through his newly styled hair and sighed, wondering what had possessed him to make this choice. His communicator buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. The message was from Tessa. "Ethan, I know this is a huge decision for you. I've been hearing more about Lyra and her empire. There's something not right about this situation. Please don't rush into this. You don't know what you're walking into. Let me help." Ethan stared at the message, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He could hear Tessa's voice in his mind, her concerns, echoing the doubts he had been suppressing. But he had made his choice. He had already committed himself to this path. To back out now would not only mean abandoning the wealth and power he had dreamed of, but it would also dishonor the agreement he had made with Lyra. There would be consequences if he reneged. With a sigh, he deleted the message and powered down his communicator. It was too late to turn back. The following day, the wedding was set to take place aboard Lyra's flagship, a massive vessel that dwarfed any human-made spacecraft Ethan had ever seen. The ship was a marvel of alien technology, its hull shimmering with a strange metallic substance that shifted colors with the light. As Ethan was escorted aboard, he was struck by the sense of opulence and grandeur that surrounded him. The corridors were lined with intricate designs, alien art, and rare materials that sparkled in the ambient light. The entire ship was a testament to Lyra's power and wealth. The wedding hall was equally breathtaking. It was a vast, circular chamber with walls that seemed to pulse with energy. The air smelled faintly of exotic flowers, and the floor was covered in an iridescent carpet that seemed to glow beneath his feet. Lyra stood at the center of the hall, surrounded by her entourage of high-ranking officials from her empire. Her presence was commanding, and despite the alien beauty of her surroundings, it was her radiance that drew all eyes to her. Ethan stood at the altar, nervously adjusting his collar. He was flanked by a group of Lyra's representatives, all of whom watched him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. They were elegant and regal, each one dressed in attire that reflected their species' wealth and status. The ceremonial officiant, a tall, serpent-like alien with golden scales, stepped forward and began speaking in a language Ethan didn't understand. His words translated into Ethan's native tongue by a small device hidden in his ear. Lyra's eyes were locked on him, her gaze intense and unwavering. There was no warmth in her expression, no sense of affection. She regarded him as a partner in a political transaction, nothing more. And yet, in the quiet of the chamber, Ethan could feel the weight of her gaze. He wondered what she saw in him. Was it just his resilience, his humanity? Or was there something else that made him the right choice for her? The officiant's voice reverberated through the chamber as the ceremony continued, his words marking the solemnity of the union. Ethan's heart raced as he felt the weight of the commitment he was making. This wasn't just a marriage. It was an alliance that could shape the future of entire star systems. It was an agreement that could either bring him unimaginable power or drag him into a conflict far beyond his comprehension. And yet, despite the lack of emotional connection, Ethan felt a flicker of something. A strange sense of responsibility, perhaps. Lyra had chosen him for a reason, and he had agreed to stand by her side. Was he simply a pawn in her game, or could he truly make a difference in her world? The moment arrived. Lyra stepped forward, her silver hair flowing behind her like a celestial wave. She placed her hand on his, her skin cool to the touch, and spoke her vows in a language that sounded ancient and foreign. Her voice was steady, commanding, but beneath it, there was a note of something deeper, a sense of purpose that Ethan couldn't quite place. I, Lyra, ruler of the Veiled Dominion, take you, Ethan Blake, as my consort, my partner, and my equal in the trials to come. Together, we will shape the future of our people. And together, We will rise above the forces that seek to destroy us. Her words resonated in the chamber, and as the ceremony drew to a close, the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Ethan barely had time to process what had just happened before Lyra leaned in, her lips brushing against his cheek in an unexpected gesture of formality. He had expected no warmth, but the moment still sent a strange thrill through him. The woman who had promised him power, wealth, and influence now held his fate in her hands. As the crowd erupted in applause, Ethan stood there, unsure of what his future held. The galaxy had just changed forever for him, and he could only hope he had made the right choice. The days following the wedding passed in a blur. Ethan had barely settled into his new life before he was thrust into the heart of Lyra's empire, a political machine unlike anything he had ever encountered. The Veiled Dominion, her domain, spanned across countless star systems, each planet governed by its own set of laws and customs, yet all were bound by Lyra's rule. The complexity of this empire was overwhelming, and Ethan felt like a small cog in a machine far too large for him to comprehend. From the moment the ceremony had ended, his life was no longer his own. He was constantly surrounded by Lyra's advisors, diplomats, and military officers, all eager to show him the benefits of his new status as consort. The lavish gifts, the constant attention, the feasts, and the wealth were all overwhelming. And yet, despite the grandeur, Ethan couldn't shake the sense that he was being watched at all times. Every conversation, every gesture, seemed to have a hidden meaning, as if everyone around him was sizing him up for some unknown reason. Lyra was ever present in his life, but she remained a distant figure. They shared no tender moments, no private conversations. Their interactions were always formal, transactional. He was, after all, her partner in power, not in romance. Yet Ethan couldn't help but wonder about her. What was it about him, a mere human, that had made her choose him? Was it simply his resilience, his tenacity? Or was there something more? One evening, as they dined aboard her flagship, Lyra finally addressed him directly. They sat at a long, opulent table, surrounded by her closest allies and military officers. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as if something was about to happen, something important. The air hummed with anticipation, and Ethan could feel the weight of their gazes on him. "How are you settling in?" Lyra's voice, cool and composed, broke the silence. She looked at him with those intense, glowing eyes, her posture regal as ever. "I trust the transition has been smooth?" Ethan nodded, though he had never felt more out of place. "It's a lot to take in," he admitted, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. "But I'm managing." Lyra studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing. "You're more adaptable than I had anticipated," she said, her tone tinged with something he couldn't quite decipher. Many would have faltered by now, overwhelmed by the responsibility and the weight of this role. But you've remained calm, even poised. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I'm just trying to keep up with everything. You have a lot on your plate. I don't want to be a burden." Lyra's lips curled into a faint smile. "A burden? No. You are an asset, Ethan. A valuable one." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "That is why I need you to understand the challenges we face. You are not here simply to stand by my side in ceremonial events. This empire, as powerful as it is, faces threats, internal and external, that could destroy everything I've worked to build." Ethan leaned forward slightly, intrigued despite himself. "What threats?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Lyra glanced around the table, as if making sure no one was listening too closely. Then she lowered her voice. "There are factions within my own court, rivals who seek to undermine my authority. They believe that by marrying a human, I've shown weakness, that I've compromised my power. They will use any excuse to challenge me, to destabilize my rule." Ethan frowned. "But you're the ruler. How could anyone challenge you? You control everything." Lyra's eyes flashed with an almost imperceptible spark of anger. "Control is never absolute, Ethan. There are always those who are willing to exploit vulnerabilities. And there is always someone waiting for an opportunity to strike. We cannot afford to be complacent. A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine as he realized the gravity of her words. He had been naive to think that this was just about wealth and status. He was now embroiled in a political game of unimaginable scale, a game where even the smallest misstep could have disastrous consequences. Lyra continued, her voice calm once more. That is why I have a task for you. Ethan blinked. A task? What kind of task? You will accompany me to the Council Summit next week. It is a gathering of the most influential leaders within the Veiled Dominion. We will be discussing important matters, trade agreements, military strategies, and the future of our empire. It will be your first test, Ethan. You will need to navigate the treacherous waters of galactic politics and show these leaders that you are more than just a figurehead. Ethan's stomach tightened at the thought. He had no experience in politics, no understanding of how these complex negotiations worked. But he understood the implication of her words. If he failed, the consequences could be catastrophic. Understood, he said, his voice firm despite his growing anxiety. Lyra's eyes softened for a moment, almost imperceptibly. Good. I knew I could count on you. As the meal continued, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the enormity of what lay ahead. The summit was only days away, and he had no idea how to prepare for such an event. The leaders of the Veiled Dominion were not just diplomats. They were ruthless power players, each with their own agenda. The slightest misstep could lead to a political disaster, or worse, an outright rebellion. As the evening wore on, Lyra's advisors began discussing the logistics of the summit, but Ethan was too distracted to listen. He was lost in thought, trying to piece together the information he had gathered. The stakes were higher than he had imagined, and now, more than ever, he realized that his role in this empire was not just about standing by Lyra's side. It was about survival. His survival. The next day, Lyra's chief strategist, a sharp-eyed alien named Yarrick, took Ethan aside to brief him on the intricacies of the upcoming summit. Yarrick was a veteran of galactic politics, a master of negotiation and manipulation, and his reputation was as sharp as his intellect. He had little patience for Ethan's lack of experience but nonetheless took the time to explain the key players in the Dominion, their interests, and the potential pitfalls that Ethan would need to avoid. The leaders you will encounter are not to be trusted, Yarrick said, his voice low and conspiratorial. They will smile at you, offer you gifts, but their eyes are always watching, calculating. They want power and they will use you to get it if you let them. Ethan nodded, absorbing the information as best he could. He was beginning to understand the complexities of the political world he had stepped into. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and he had no illusions about the dangers that lay ahead. As the summit approached, the sense of tension in the air grew palpable. Lyra was determined to strengthen her position, but Ethan knew that it would not be easy. The path forward was fraught with peril, and it was clear that the Empire's survival, perhaps even Lyra's, depended on the decisions made in the coming days. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, would he emerge from this unscathed, or would the galaxy's politics consume him whole? The journey to the summit was a tense one. The moment Lyra and Ethan boarded her flagship and set course for the grand capital of the Veiled Dominion, an atmosphere of anticipation and unease settled over the ship. The flagship's corridors, usually filled with a soft hum of activity, now seemed strangely quiet. Even the usual hum of the engines seemed to have quieted, as if the very ship sensed the gravity of what was to come. Ethan was on edge. He had spent the last few days studying everything he could about the council leaders, gathering as much information as possible about their motivations, strengths, and weaknesses. Yarrick, Lyra's strategist, had been relentless in his preparation, instructing Ethan on how to navigate the complex political landscape of the Dominion. The key, Yarrick said, was to avoid showing any sign of weakness. In politics, even a fleeting hesitation could be interpreted as doubt, and doubt was dangerous. As the flagship approached the capital planet, a vast metropolis filled with towering spires and gleaming structures that seemed to defy the laws of physics, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the city's grandeur. The capital of the Dominion was a place of unimaginable wealth and power, but beneath its shining exterior, Ethan knew that it was also a place of cutthroat competition and political intrigue. Every decision made within those towering walls could ripple across the galaxy, affecting millions of lives. Lyra, ever composed, stood at the observation deck, her silver hair flowing like liquid light as she gazed out at the city below. She seemed unaffected by the grandeur of the place, as though she had seen it all before. Ethan, however, was keenly aware of how small he felt in comparison. He was a human, a mere mortal standing next to a being whose very presence could command the fate of entire star systems. "You are nervous," Lyra said, her voice breaking the silence. Ethan looked over at her, surprised by the sudden observation. "A little," he admitted, feeling exposed. Lyra turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "You should be. This is not a place for weakness, Ethan. I need you to be strong. I have chosen you for your resilience, your tenacity. You will need both in the days to come." Ethan nodded, his throat dry. "I'll do my best." "Good," Lyra said, her lips curling into a faint smile. "This summit will determine the future of the Dominion. The leaders who will be there, they are not like your human politicians. They are ruthless, calculating, and deeply self-interested. If you show them even the smallest crack in your armor, they will exploit it. Do not let them see your doubts." As the flagship docked at the Grand Palace, a sense of foreboding settled over Ethan. They were met by a procession of alien dignitaries, each more extravagant than the last, as they entered the imposing building. The palace was a blend of ancient architecture and modern technology, a fusion of old-world aesthetics and cutting-edge design. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the very air felt charged with the weight of history. The council chamber was a vast hall, its ceiling high and open, revealing a shimmering sky of distant stars. At the center, a massive circular table sat surrounded by 12 high-ranking leaders, representatives from the most powerful factions of the Dominion. They were a diverse group, some humanoid, others not. Some had multiple limbs, others had no visible eyes, and a few exuded an otherworldly presence that seemed to distort the space around them. Lyra and Ethan entered the chamber together, and all eyes immediately turned to them. The silence was palpable, each leader sizing them up with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The tension in the room was thick, as though the very air was holding its breath. One of the leaders, a tall alien with dark, spiny skin, leaned forward. His eyes, black and unblinking, studied Ethan intently. "So this is the human," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "The one who has somehow won the favor of our great empress." Ethan stood straighter, doing his best to meet the leader's gaze. "I am honored to be here," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the underlying anxiety he felt. Lyra, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "Ethan Blake is more than just a human. He is my consort, my partner, and my equal in all matters concerning the Dominion's future." The mention of Ethan's new title seemed to send ripples through the room. Several of the leaders exchanged glances, their expressions inscrutable. It was clear that not all were pleased with the idea of a human being given such a prominent role. Lyra's power was immense, but even she couldn't simply force these leaders into accepting her choices. The summit began in earnest with discussions about trade, military strategies, and the ever-present threat of the Dominion's rivals. Ethan sat at Lyra's side, trying to follow the flow of conversation, but it was like being dropped into the middle of a complex chess game without knowing the rules. Every word exchanged, every gesture carried weight. The leaders spoke in riddles, their conversations a delicate dance of diplomacy and power plays. As the hours dragged on, Ethan began to feel the pressure mounting. The leaders were sharp, their words calculated to probe for any sign of weakness. One by one, they tested Lyra, trying to undermine her authority, challenging her ideas, questioning her motives. Every time they pushed, she responded with a calm, measured response, never flinching, never allowing herself to be rattled. But Ethan knew that the true challenge had not yet arrived. He was a mere observer, a spectator in this high-stakes game of politics. Lyra had placed him in the position of consort for a reason. She needed his resilience, his adaptability, but also his strength in moments like this. As the summit wore on, he began to realize that he wasn't just there to support her. He was there to be tested as well. It came in the form of a subtle challenge, a question that seemed innocuous at first but carried with it a deadly weight. A leader from one of the outer sectors, an alien with shimmering, translucent skin, spoke up. "Ethan Blake," she said, her voice smooth but laced with an undercurrent of disdain. "Your species is known for its resourcefulness, yes? But tell me, how does a species so fragile, so weak, manage to survive in a galaxy teeming with dangers?" The question hung in the air, a trap carefully laid. Ethan could feel the room's attention shift to him, the gaze of every leader now fixed on him. This wasn't just about Lyra anymore. It was about proving himself, showing that he had the strength and intelligence to survive in this cutthroat world. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. This was his moment, the moment that would determine whether he belonged in this world or whether he would be discarded as an outsider. He had no choice but to answer with confidence. After all, Lyra's future and his own rested on his response. "We are not just a species of survival, but of innovation and adaptation," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Humanity has faced extinction countless times, but we don't crumble. We fight, we adapt, and we find new ways to overcome. It is that resilience that has allowed us to thrive in a galaxy that is not kind to the weak." The leaders exchanged silent glances, their expressions unreadable. Ethan could sense that his answer had struck a chord, though he couldn't tell whether it was one of approval or contempt. He had survived the test for now. But as the summit continued, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The true danger had yet to reveal itself, and in the world of galactic politics, survival was never guaranteed. The council summit was far from over, and the tension in the grand hall was reaching its peak. Ethan could feel the weight of each conversation, each subtle movement in the room, as if the air itself was thick with the scent of hidden agendas. It wasn't just the leaders who made Ethan uneasy. It was the undercurrent of deceit, the unspoken alliances and silent betrayals that ran beneath the polished surface of diplomacy. Everyone here wanted something, and Ethan wasn't sure if they saw him as an ally, a pawn, or something in between. Lyra, ever poised, remained the calm center of the storm, but Ethan noticed the flickers of strain in her eyes. There was something deeper going on, something that wasn't being spoken aloud. Lyra was playing her cards, and from what he could gather, she was beginning to realize that not all of her allies were as loyal as they appeared. Trust, it seemed, was a rare commodity in this room. The hours dragged on, and Ethan found himself being drawn into increasingly intense conversations with the other leaders. The more he listened, the more he realized that the summit wasn't just about trade or military strategy, it was about power. Each leader was jockeying for position, attempting to manipulate the flow of negotiations to their own advantage. The stakes were higher than he had imagined, and every decision made in that room could have far-reaching consequences. Then, just as Ethan began to relax, thinking the summit might be winding down, it happened. The most unexpected of the Dominion's leaders, a tall, sleek alien with glowing blue skin and piercing silver eyes, stood up, his voice cutting through the discussions like a blade. "I think it's time to address the matter of Lyra's husband," he said, his tone dripping with thinly veiled mockery. The room went silent. Ethan's blood ran cold. He had heard of Derek's before, one of the most influential and powerful leaders in the Dominion, a ruthless figure known for his ability to manipulate events in his favor. He had never trusted him, and now, it seemed, his suspicions were justified. Derek's wasn't just testing Lyra's power, he was aiming to dismantle it, piece by piece. What exactly is a human supposed to offer in this alliance? Derek's continued, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Ethan. A species that can barely survive without technological assistance? A species that is so fragile, so easily destroyed? What role could such a creature possibly play in the future of the Veiled Dominion? The room's attention shifted to Ethan, the quiet whispers of the council's leaders buzzing in the background. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he held himself steady. Derek's was looking for a weakness, a sign of doubt. He was testing Lyra's resolve, and if Ethan faltered, it would be used against them both. Lyra, however, didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it as she responded, her words laced with authority. "Ethan is no mere human," she said, her eyes locking with Derek's. "He is my partner, my equal, and he represents the strength and resilience of humanity. A strength that I believe will be crucial to the future of this empire." Derek's lips curled into a smirk. "Resilience?" he scoffed. "Is that what you call it? The ability to survive? I suppose you could say the same about cockroaches." The laughter that followed was muted but unmistakable. Ethan felt the sting of the insult, but he refused to show it. He was a human, yes, but that didn't mean he was weak. He wasn't here by chance. He was here because Lyra had chosen him for his strength. His silence in the face of Derek's mockery was a testament to that. But it wasn't just Ethan's strength that was being tested. It was Lyra's. The room watched as the two of them faced off, a subtle but undeniable tension building between them. "Enough," Lyra said, her voice cutting through the mockery like a sharp blade. "We are here to discuss the future of the Dominion, not to engage in petty insults. Ethan is my consort, and I expect your respect." Derek's eyes narrowed. "Respect? For a human?" His voice dropped lower, as though speaking only for Lyra's ears, but the rest of the room was still listening. "You've made a dangerous choice, Lyra. Your enemies are not just outside the Dominion. There are those within who will use this weakness against you." The room fell into an uneasy silence as Derek's words hung in the air. There was no denying it, what he said was true. There were factions within the Dominion, silent factions, who had never supported Lyra's rise to power. Her marriage to a human, no matter how politically advantageous it might have seemed, was a symbol of vulnerability, a crack in the armor that some would inevitably exploit. Lyra didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if she might actually waver. But then, with a steely resolve, she spoke. "Let them come," she said, her voice unwavering. "If they believe that my marriage to Ethan is a weakness, then they are welcome to try and exploit it. But know this, they will not succeed. I have faced greater threats than this, and I will continue to rise above them." The tension in the room was palpable, but the moment had passed. Derek's, though clearly displeased, didn't push further. The summit resumed, but the damage had been done. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and now it was up to Lyra and Ethan to prove that they were unbreakable. As the meeting continued, Ethan could sense the subtle shift in the dynamics. Some of the leaders were more sympathetic toward him, as if they saw him as a test of Lyra's resolve. Others, however, viewed him with growing disdain, their skepticism now tinged with open hostility. Later that evening, after the summit had recessed for the day, Lyra took Ethan aside in the privacy of her quarters. She was quieter than usual, her expression more contemplative. The weight of the day seemed to have settled on her shoulders. "Derek's words were not without merit," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "There are factions within the Dominion who see my marriage as a weakness, and they will not stop until they try to use it against me." Ethan remained silent, unsure of what to say. He had never felt more out of place than in that moment. He was a human, nothing more, nothing less. And yet, here he was, standing in the middle of a galactic empire, caught between Lyra's ambitions and the growing animosity of her enemies. "We'll face them together," he said at last, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. Lyra regarded him carefully, her gaze piercing. "Yes," she said, her lips curling into a small, approving smile. "Together." But even as she spoke those words, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something far darker. The shadow of betrayal loomed closer, and he wasn't sure if it would come from within the Dominion or from somewhere far worse. The summit had only just begun, but already the game had changed. The days following the summit grew increasingly tense. Lyra's political maneuvering became sharper, more precise, as if she could feel the tightening noose of betrayal drawing closer. The leaders who had once looked at her with veiled respect now viewed her with suspicion, their questions more probing. their motives more transparent. Derek's, ever the shadow at the edge of the gathering, continued to stir the pot, subtly but persistently challenging Lyra's choices, testing her resolve at every turn. Ethan could feel it too. His place in this intricate web of power had never felt more precarious. His earlier confidence seemed to evaporate with each passing day. Every moment spent in the presence of those cold, calculating leaders reminded him of how little he truly understood about the complex politics of the Veiled Dominion. He had no place here, no true influence. He was just a human, a pawn in a game far beyond his comprehension. And yet, he was tethered to Lyra, to the fate of the Dominion, to her dreams of a unified empire. Late one evening, as the glow of the capital's city lights filtered through the vast windows of Lyra's quarters, she summoned him. Ethan entered the room cautiously, as he always did these days. Lyra stood near the observation deck, her posture regal, her gaze fixed on the stars. Her silver hair cascaded like a wave of light, and the calm aura around her seemed to only heighten the weight of the conversation ahead. "You've been quiet," Lyra said, not turning to face him. "And that worries me." Ethan shifted uneasily. "I don't belong here, Lyra. I know that now. I don't have the skills you need, the knowledge. I'm just a human." Lyra turned toward him, her eyes flashing with intensity. "You're more than just a human, Ethan. You've already proven that. But the real question is whether you can keep proving it." He met her gaze, feeling the magnitude of her words. "What do you mean?" Her expression softened, but the steel in her voice remained. "I've seen how they look at you, how they look at us." Derek's words were only the beginning. "There are those within the Dominion who will stop at nothing to see me fail. But that failure won't come from external forces. It will come from within." Ethan furrowed his brow. "You're saying someone here is working against you?" Lyra's lips tightened, but she didn't answer immediately. She walked over to a control panel on the wall, her fingers dancing across it in a series of rapid movements. A holographic display flickered to life in front of them, showing intricate patterns of data, communication logs, and encrypted files. Ethan stared at the screen, confused and overwhelmed by the flood of information. "Someone is leaking information about our movements," Lyra said, her voice low and measured. "Our strategies, our plans, they're being passed along to our rivals. The council is divided, and one of them is playing both sides. And I believe you've already met them." Ethan's heart skipped a beat as a name flashed on the hologram. "Derek's." "No," he said, his voice shaking with disbelief. "It's him." Lyra nodded. "Derek's is the architect of this conspiracy. He's playing a long game, biding his time, waiting for the moment when he can strike. If we don't act quickly, he will destroy everything I've built." Ethan's mind raced. "But how do we stop him? He has too many allies. We're outmatched." Lyra's gaze was unwavering. "You're wrong. We have one thing Derek's doesn't: the element of surprise. He underestimates us, Ethan. He thinks he can control me, manipulate me through my marriage to you. He's wrong. And if we move swiftly, if we play our cards right, we can turn this game around." Ethan swallowed hard. The weight of her words settled heavily on his chest. He had never signed up for anything like this. He wasn't a political strategist, he wasn't a trained soldier. He was just a man caught in the crossfire of an empire's internal war. And yet, somehow, it felt as though the universe had led him here for a reason. He had to trust Lyra. He had to trust himself. "Tell me what to do," he said, his voice steady with determination. Lyra gave him a rare smile, one that reached her eyes and softened the sharp edges of her usual demeanor. "I knew I chose well. The plan, though risky, was deceptively simple." Ethan was to infiltrate Derek's inner circle, using his human status to remain unnoticed by the alien's suspicious eyes. They had learned through intercepted messages that Derek's had been in contact with various factions outside the Dominion, promising them access to critical intelligence in exchange for support. The key to ending his plot lay in exposing his duplicity before his allies could rally behind him. Lyra had a network of spies within the Dominion, agents loyal to her, but Derek's influence ran deep. They couldn't rely solely on the information they had gathered. Ethan had to be the one to get close to Derek's, to gain his trust, and to retrieve the evidence needed to expose him once and for all. It was a dangerous move. If Derek suspected anything, it would be the end for both of them. Ethan spent the following days preparing, learning everything he could about Derek's movements, his habits, his trusted lieutenants. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became that Derek's was no simple adversary. His alliances stretched far beyond the Dominion, and his ambitions reached into every corner of the galaxy. But Ethan also discovered something else, something that gave him hope. Derek's was arrogant. He believed that Lyra's marriage to Ethan was nothing more than a political maneuver, a sign of weakness. And that arrogance, Ethan realized, could be his downfall. The night before Ethan was set to confront Derek's, Lyra met him in the privacy of her quarters once again. The weight of the upcoming confrontation hung between them like a storm cloud. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "I've never been more certain of anything, Ethan," Lyra said finally, her voice soft yet filled with conviction. "You are ready for this. And no matter what happens tomorrow, know that you have proven yourself to me. You have earned your place in this galaxy. Never doubt that." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He didn't know what would happen the next day, or if he would even survive the encounter with Derek's. But in that moment, standing beside Lyra, he felt stronger than he had ever felt in his life. He wasn't just fighting for her. He was fighting for something bigger, the future of the Dominion, the survival of an empire, and his own place in this vast, complex galaxy. "I won't let you down," he said, his voice thick with resolve. "I know," Lyra replied, her eyes gleaming with a fire that matched his own. The next day, under the cover of night, Ethan made his move. He entered Derek's private chambers under the pretense of discussing an alliance, a false gesture of cooperation. Derek's greeted him with his usual smug smile, but his eyes flickered with suspicion. Ethan could feel the weight of his gaze, probing, searching for any sign of deception. The moment of truth had come. "You've come at a delicate time, Ethan," Derek said, his voice smooth, yet edged with something dangerous. "But I believe you understand the stakes. We have an opportunity to reshape the Dominion, you and I." Ethan met his gaze, his pulse quickening. "I'm listening," he said, knowing that this conversation could either make or break everything. The game was on, and it would be a battle for survival, not just for him but for Lyra and the Dominion itself. Every move mattered now. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.